I'd like to call this meeting to order for March 19, 2025, for 7 o'clock start for budget workshop number 3. Everybody please rise to the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. DeLee, would you read the announcements?
Good evening and welcome to Budget Workshop number 3. In case of an emergency, please exit the building using marked exits. Please do not enter your vehicle and attempt to leave, as you may impede the arrival of emergency vehicles. Smoking and the use of vape products is strictly prohibited on school grounds. During the public comment portion of the evening, comments and/or questions will be limited to the budget presentation only.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Mazie and team, Nicole and Doreen.
Good evening, welcome. Thank you for being here for our third and final budget workshop for the 25-26 budget. This is the culmination of our efforts this year, and you're going to hear several themes that are consistent throughout that you've been hearing as we've been talking about this entire process. We've been very diligent in our approach to this, and you saw it really firsthand financially at the last budget workshop. You're going to see more numbers that support the efforts of this team, the cabinet team, and of course all of our academic directors and principals. So I'm happy to start to share that with you as you see it's starting now to come into focus. Tonight we'll be going over the staff and benefits, interfund transfer, community schools budgets, revenues, tax rate, grant funding, fund balance analysis, and financial plan projections. So we start with staffing. And when we talked about our concerns at the onset of the year, we talked about what we thought state aid was going to look like and the support we'd receive from the government and the legislature. And, so far, true to form, we don't see any change in that. We were very ahead of the curve in terms of our approach, not just this year, but I'm going to call your attention to last year. And like I said, you're going to hear redundancies throughout this presentation as I show you different information that really kind of support the thinking that we've employed, because we employed multi-year thinking in our approach to this day, not having those federal funds to support our staffing efforts. And while we never wanted to take away supports that we put in place for the students, we had to be mindful of what the community could support and also what our needs are. So when we talk about staffing, you'll see there that there's a proposed decrease of 9 instructional staff members. We're going to go through that in more detail in the next slide. I think it's always important to know when we make these decisions, they're not just made based on financial. They're made based on various things. Number one, being our enrollment numbers. Our enrollment numbers right now are decreasing. We are going to graduate a class of 675, I believe, this year, 667. And we only have 2 other classes that are more than 600 students, and it's our 10th and 11th graders. So all of our other remaining classes are all in the 5s or lower, one's even in the 4s. So we have to be mindful of that. So you'll see changes. Ms. Kennedy and Dr. Lukes have been very mindful of looking at that when they're doing their staffing, which can change on a regular basis. We're also looking at the retirements that we're receiving from our staff, and we make those decisions with that in mind, with these things in mind. So when we talk about the staffing, some of the notable changes are we're looking first to take some of our TOSAs at 6 of our elementary buildings. They're 0.5s currently, means half of a full-time equivalent, which is FTE. You see that on the screen, and returning them full-time to the classroom. That would be a reduction of 3 FTEs. At the elementary level,
I just want to stop to
Sure.
be clear here. I think it's important to pause for a minute to say we're not accessing, there's no intent to access any single teacher or to minimally impact program. There are 21 retirements this year. I believe it's 21, is that correct?
23.
It went up to 23. So 23 retirements. And so the approach to this was looking at the staffing to identify what the needs are per cohort level. for the high school, for all the secondary needs for the elementary, from a special ed perspective, from a general ed perspective. Looking at all of this in aggregate, working with the directors and Garrett, who works on the master schedule of the high school, along with all the directors and the principals, Mrs. Canetti has been working tirelessly with them to identify what are the staffing needs for each cohort. And also being mindful that we have gotten almost a flat rate of state aid for this year. So as the cost we know of doing business is going to increase when you're just talking about salary increases alone, let alone what we know the cost of living is going to be in the climate that is forecasted to be. So we had to look at what can we live with? How can we move forward? How can we not excess so we sustain our staffing? What areas can we adjust without impacting the class sizes significantly or the program impact, but yet be able to scale back given that we have almost no state aid increase? And if we continue in that direction when we're losing federal funds, it's not going to be sustainable. So what could we do? So the cabinet as a whole met from back in October to look at the vision for what makes sense to move the district forward and how could we look at the staffing to identify as cohorts are going up and the size of the cohorts are smaller, where do we need to scale back as those classes go up and graduate to the next one? And so that is what Mrs. Canetti and Dr. Lucas look at. Also looking at, from Dr. Lucas' perspective, how many students are aging out, at 22 years old. What does that look at? How many kids are going to be declassified, or how many are going to additionally be classified? So what you see here is a byproduct of recommended changes in order to not excess and to scale back a little bit as we try to sustain the programs that we have put in place.
Can I ask a question? So for the returning of the TOSAs, it says there's 6. So we have 7 elementary schools, so.
Right. So the TOSAs right now, what we did was, if you remember, in those COVID grants and those ARP grant, we had put TOSAs in. To support the buildings as a transition, Dr. Jones and I approved a 1 year where we reduced them just to offer them some more support before we just move them back full time. So currently, right now, they teach for part of the day. So they're 0.5 TOSA and like AIS teachers. Now they're going to go back full-time AIS teachers. So they split their day. So even though there's 6, we do not have one at Eagle because they have an AP.
Right.
So it was the buildings that did not have the AP because their AP serves as an instructional support leader there. So it was 6 buildings, but really 3 because they teach for part of the time, if that makes,
So they're going back to full-time.
full-time,
No
right?
more TOSAs at all.
We have, no more, Tom Whaley is still a teacher on special assignment,
Sure.
offering support for the iReady at the math and through 6th grade. Geraldine Ray, she will still be a teacher on special assignment for the Sabbaths. And then we have our chair people that are technically on special assignment. So there's still TOSAs, but these particular ones that came from the COVID grant are going back to the classroom.
And the liaisons are still.
The building liaisons are, they have 2 community liaisons and a building liaison. So the building liaisons, they will keep because that's in the general fund. But the community liaisons, I actually have written them in our Title IV grant and our district improvement plan. So I really can't predict until I receive the grants, and should I get those grants and be able to write them in, then we will appoint them in September. But right now, they won't be there.
So how many individuals we have, how many posters we have for AIS support?
AIS teachers, we have about 11. Right, and that's not changing. So we will still continue the AIS teachers, so that FTE is not changing.
I felt it was important to pause here because I could sense, I know you well enough to know, wait, what just happened here? And so we know that this was going to age out at some point, and if we get additional money, obviously, we're going to be mindful of all of that, but right now, we knew we had to phase it out, and we started the phase out last year because it was COVID money, and at one point, we had over 20 million in COVID money, and we knew that was not going to be sustainable over time.
Yeah, the other question I had too, we were talking about class sizes, 6, 7 now. What's the average class size in the elementary schools?
Yeah, and I apologize, it's 21 math AIS teachers throughout the, 21.
Math AIS
Math AIS.
and 11 reading.
No, we have more reading. So right now, we have scheduled for next year 21 math AIS teachers, and reading teachers right now.
I thought it was similar.
It might be slightly higher, about 29 we have. We'll probably have 28 next year.
And they're not affected by this.
Yeah, and when I say math AIS, we offer, there's probably more AIS, but at the secondary level, it's covered by our math teachers, so it's incorporated math AIS into our math FTEs, right? At the elementary level, it's actually elementary teachers. But we still, when you think of AIS, we still offer even more because, right, yeah. So we still offer at the middle school, but it's incorporated into our math FTEs.
And what are the class sizes for elementary school? Do you have any of those?
Yeah, so for next year or this year?
Next year's fine, just start average.
So I would say
I'm
average,
just thinking, 6, 6, 7.
22 in a class.
No, I don't mean like the higher grade.
Oh, the cohort?
We have that. Yeah.
Well, this year, right now in kindergarten, we have just about 516 students. Right, and that's one of our lowest. At the fifth grade, we are under 500. We're about 495. So our fifth grade is our actual lowest cohort right now. Yeah.
In that 500 range, about.
Right, and then we have like a blip where in first grade, we have, like 578. So we're at, a 495 in one cohort, and in another cohort, we can be at the highest right now. Our cohort in the elementary is 578. The largest cohort right now is our current first graders, which were about 578. That's our largest cohort in our elementary schools. So that's a significant difference.
And the challenge,
That's like, yes, that could be 2 elementary that were lower in kindergarten.
the challenge is when we try to budget for this, we don't even know at the time that we're preparing, we're opening for pre-K and kindergarten registration, but we don't have final numbers until the summer. And so the
Yes.
numbers change over
Every day.
the summer.
Every day.
Yeah. So what usually happens, Dr. Lucas and I always err on the side that more kids will be coming, and then we make the adjustment the following year. So we always open, and we may have very low classes in case we need overflow, and then we adjust it the following year.
So what you see here is a byproduct of countless discussions at the cabinet level, countless discussions with the directors, Lori, and the principals to kind of figure out what the how many sections are necessary on the secondary level by department and on the elementary by section.
So are we go by now, right? Like, let's say current first graders, we know then we're
That's right.
coming up to next.
Yes.
And what is our goal as far as class size for that?
So-
I know we do have a
Yeah.
wide range of different numbers in different buildings.
Right now, our class sizes, we have a few closed sections that Dr. Lucas monitors very carefully. But I would say next year, I would say our most consistent grade is first grade next year. I would say it's probably gonna be 21, 22 across the board.
In first grade.
Right, and right now, and you'll see, that's collapsing a section going up because we were so low, because if you remember, I just said we were at 580, that's what we thought we were going to have, and we didn't receive 580 students. So even collapsing a section, I'm able to keep those numbers very low.
And even across all the schools, because I know I know this year when I looked at some of the numbers, some of the schools had 17 and some of the schools had 26.
Right.
Some of the
And
challenges
That's the
is-
dual language program. That's where we get that's the tough one to balance.
Because there's one general.
That's
ed,
right.
And then the rest.
So and with dual language, that's the default program for students who come in as English language learners. They have to go into our dual language program. So those numbers do get high, but if the board remembers, I did put full-time TAs in kindergarten and first grade to support our dual language programs. So that was to help because we knew those numbers were a little bit higher typically, and that's why we added those TAs. They've been very helpful. Yeah.
Frank.
So to continue, and like I said, all the points that have been raised, are things you're gonna hear as we go through this, because, like I said, this is, while the staffing is not finalized and the state aid is not finalized, this is what part of the budgeting process is. So these are some of the things that, like I said, we've talked about that we think we can make happen. At the elementary level, Ms. Kennedy just mentioned the newcomer program. We're looking to add staff there, but there will be offset of reduction of certain sections, kindergarten and first grade in particular, primarily due to low enrollment. Overall, we're talking about a net result of -1 FTE.
But no excessing and a byproduct of balancing class size so they're not way too low. We're still able to get on average class sizes between 21 and 22. And with the excess, not excessing, but with retirements, this is not affecting any of our current staff members. It's just modifying based on efficiencies and class sizes.
That's well said. If I didn't say that earlier, I was remiss. Wasn't the design of this is to be financially responsible in our budgeting without adversely impacting instructional services. That was the overarching goal. We had to find ways to do that, and there's several ways to do that, primarily though through adjustments to the enrollment numbers and through these retirements, what we call attrition. At the high school level, we're looking to add 1 FT for the construction trades and law enforcement classes. But then we would see a reduction of 3 FTEs in secondary schools due to those low enrollment numbers and staff retirements as well. Additionally, we're looking, based on I believe this is also for retirements, -1 in the reading area. And then in special education, Dr. Lucas even contacted me tonight that this may even be fluctuating and changing, but it would be 2 FTEs overall. Right now, we had last discussed an integrated co-teaching staff member and then 1 in first grade. But the overall net effect would be for us to budget 9 FTEs in terms of reduction to support the budget you're going to see this year. So now we get to the benefits that are going to be associated with these staffing numbers. There are several that I've highlighted for you that are just more notable that I wanted to call to your attention. So you'll see that the first one is the New York
We
State
don't see it, but we'll hear it. Say it.
Okay.
I just,
It's actually even smaller, I think, on the screen. So I believe that's 74,000.
Next year.
Production?
I can see it just fine.
By the way, we're gonna have a $75,000 increase in optometrist costs for next year for the entire board. But that $74,000 number is because the contribution rate for the TRS is the teacher retirement system, is it decreased from 10.02% to 9.59%. The next one, though, you see a large increase, you might see a large increase. That blur you see is 380,000 in terms of an increase. 390, my young cohort, as Comrade has told me, 390,000. And that is for the Social Security because the annual wage cap is increased 4.5%. So by that going up, it means the portion of taxes that are going to be subject to FICA are going to increase accordingly. So far, so that component is the Social Security piece that you see there. And then one of the other ones is the reduction of, tell them, Nicole, 427? There it goes. Okay, so 427 in terms of a decrease, and that's attributable in part to the lower than anticipated mid-year increase. So you may recall from the first budget workshop, we always talk about that. We have to plan for it now in this budget year, but we're subject to whatever they hit us with in January every year. So because the number came in a little bit lower than we anticipated last year, we're going to benefit now in the subsequent year. Okay, along the lines of our debt service and our in-fund transfers, I really want to call your attention to, because everything else is primarily flat,
So you moved on from benefits to debt service. So overall, the increase in aggregate, net of the pluses and minuses was 117,000 in the employee benefit category.
Yep,
Right.
and I apologize, there's a summary slide at the end of these files, but I can go through each one as we go.
And that recommendation on TRS was for low, right?
It was to lower it because TRS came in initially, it was decreased from the current year of 10.02 to 9.59 for next year. So therefore, there's a reduction in TRS.
But it's still tied to the market rate.
Yeah, but once they establish the rate for the year,
It's locked.
They'll hold it.
yeah,
Yep,
They-
they'll hold it.
locked
Yep.
in.
They do like a 5-year average of returns to
Right.
get their rates. So if there's a increase or decrease in the market, you see it
They
over
adjust.
time.
Okay.
And now moving on to the debt service and interfund transfers line. The one that I've highlighted for you is the interfund transfer to capital. And you recall how we utilize this line to help us avoid bonded debt. And regardless of the fact that we had passed bond last year very successfully, passed the bond, that still is a major priority for us to address the infrastructure needs throughout our district. It's still very prevalent. It's something that's been a focus of the Buildings and Operations Committee throughout the year. At our most recent meeting, Trustee Krieger and I went through this with them, and we talked to them about the projects that we're thinking and gave them the rationales to why, with their recommendation for what you're going to see now on this subsequent slide. Before I do go forward, though, this is, for these budget lines, we're looking at about a $40,000 increase or 4.38%.
I did want to, if you could go back.
Sure, of course.
I wanted to also bring to the board's attention a couple of other things. You'll note that the transfer to school lunch fund is a zero. And due to funding that we've received in excess fund balance in the category of food service, we don't have to allocate. For many years, I was recommending that we allocate at least 50,000 to restore equipment, et cetera. But now they are in a position for a while, due to their fund balance, for us not to need to supplement. So that is something that's noticeable that you won't see there, that you used to see there. And the other thing I just want to draw to your attention is that the debt service line, in the next couple of years, that particular line, we're going to see a fluctuation as some older debt gets paid off. And as we start to begin to budget for the new debt coming in. But you will see that when in an initial year or so, you'll see that it'll go up a little, then you'll start seeing it decline over time. You recall that we said that when we were going over the bond issue, but you're gonna start to see that number change.
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
I have a question about, is there any anticipated effect on the pulling of funding for school lunch at the federal
Yes.
level?
Yes.
Yes, and so it's great that you brought that up. It's something that we have been thinking about, not just for school lunch, because you have to look at anything that is funded from the federal government, because we don't know for sure what's going to happen as all these cuts are taking place at the federal level. We've been told that they're gonna transfer those monies to state for the state to have more command and control over those funds. We don't know exactly how this is gonna work. So one of the things that Frank, Doreen, Nicole, and I have been talking about is what is the contingency plan should some or all of those grant funds that we do have remaining begin to dry up or not be reallocated, even if funds are shifted to the state. We don't know exactly how some of those funds, for instance, emergency immigrant money, we don't know what's going to happen with that. So we're being very mindful to talk about what are our contingent plans and what are the priorities of what we need to plan, a plan B for. And to that regard, I think it's important also to state that there may be a cost of doing business associated with purchasing capital-related materials. You know, there may be a slowdown. There may be an significant increase in pricing. The thing, yes, associated with tariffs, and that is ever evolving. But one of the things you need to be mindful of is, so that we don't say, oh, you know, we should stop all the work, is that we always factor in escalation cost. We always factor in for contingencies. And if you think back, those of you who have been here a while, Tom being here the longest, you know that you can count on one hand of that any change orders that were increases. We have not had increases to change orders, which means that we are working within the confines of our budget. And typically, it is customary for us to have money left over and to be able to make additional repairs in accordance with what the community has approved. So to provide you some measure of comfort in a time of uncertainty as it relates to budgeting, just know that we don't have to approve a bid that comes in way out of whack. We can approve components of the bid and still move forward the Bay project, still move forward all the projects, and just monitor, and we can we can develop bid specifications that have add-ons should they be in an appropriate cost allowance. Then we have add-ons to a bid, and we can always have the option of not awarding a bid and going out again, modifying the specifications and even the timeline such that it lives within the parameters of our budget.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just say one last thing about the food service, because that was a great point that Dr. Jones brought up about community eligibility provision. If you remember to budget workshop number 1, we shared the governor's proposal. That was one of our key points that they wanted to, they call it universal free meals, that they recognized that early on that even if the federal government pulls out of their portion, that the state would pick that up. And it looks like so far, what we saw last week, the House may support that. So we are expecting that, hoping for that. But that's why that plan that we put together, I believe it was December, Mr. Irwin and I shared that with you, kind of like that multi-tiered approach to some equipment, long-term items, staffing, and then also the upgrades with food. So that's kind of like what our thinking is. We didn't expend all of it, but kind of like that's what our thinking is. We know we'll have another good year this year, but with our eye on the future.
Thank you.
Welcome. So last we were talking was that interfund transfer to capital. So this is the information that was shared with the Buildings and Operations Committee. And I'm going to go through the list with you quickly because it's not that long, but important to know, like I said, for instance, how these items arrive on this list. And this is a culmination of a lot of efforts by myself, Mr. Manello, and Mr. Noonan, as we go through this, and then, like I said, shared it with the committee. But we're taking input from various sources. One of those being the building condition survey that our architects prepare for us. That's a primary one. One is the group that you saw, the civics group from the high school that made their presentation on the library last month. And then others are things that we are experiencing through our normal day-to-day. And this one most prominent is the ARP funding that we exhausted that we use for the safety locks. So I'll quickly run through these. But the first one is the 1.2 million that's estimated for asbestos floor tile removal and installation of what they call vinyl composite tile. Now, we have this at various buildings. You'll see the 5 that we've noted there. 4 that we've noted there. But I wanted to call your attention that we actually worked backwards into this number. When we went through the BCS, the real number for the asbestos removal of these tiles is around 6 million. But we wanted to see the other things that we wanted to do, is what we do with the interfund transfer is try to do something for all of the buildings so that everyone's going to benefit. And that's where you'll see this multi-tiered approach to this as well. So the next line is that district-wide looking to do the door locks, because while we brought in the door locks for single classrooms, okay, now we're looking to do them for other spaces that may not have gotten them because we didn't have the funding for it, or primarily double doors. Because, and I don't know if this one has it, but yes, it does. But you can throw that bolt into a door mullion on a single door. But the second you have a double door, okay, there's nothing there. So Mr. Noonan's been investigating different options and found some. Went around the entire district to determine what doors don't have them, and that's how we got the estimate that you see of the 600,000 to put those safety mechanisms in for those doors.
So
So
every,
Diana-
yeah, so every door that doesn't
That's
have
right.
it is
Yes, yes,
going in the whole district.
yes. And it's gonna require, you know, a lot of working with our staff on this. Like, for instance, we happened to be at Bay recently. The Bay Gymnasium has 4 sets of double doors on the main corridor, and then the door at the back down the wing. It's not prudent for us to have to put them on all sets of the double doors. We want to keep the kids safe. We think 3 of those 4 should stay locked all the time, and they need the one door in and out to the bathroom or the main office or what have you. That's the thinking that we want to employ when we do that, so that they're still safe and secure. But the one door that's going to be the traffic door, that's where we're going to put that safety. So if they have to close it, and not fumble for a key, quickly lock it with a safety mechanism. That's going to be the thing. And then one on the other side. And that's just one example. You kind of have to think about that like the high school auditorium. You have doors at every entrance, north, south, east, west.
But in the case of egress, is that an issue?
No.
They'll still open.
Oh, yes.
If everybody's going out. It's just
Correct.
the sense of coming out.
Yes,
Okay.
like if we do it this door, I show you here, it's a push button, it throws the deadbolt. To disengage, simply pull down on the handle and walk out the way you would any other door. That's why we love that system. Okay, moving on to several buildings that need the replacement of the Primex clock transmitters. And Mr. Noonan can speak to this more if you need to, but all these clocks need to be synced together, especially for the change of periods. But something as nominal seeming as that, it's not simply just replacing the clock, it's to the tune of $60,000 for that kind of a project. But you can understand obviously how important that is for us to have that, but, you know,
Is that because it was different systems that had to get synced up?
What it is they have a different frequency, and it's end of the life. They put it in about 15 years ago. So what happens sometimes when the clocks, the frequency doesn't work with the transmitter, it screws up the bells, the passing bells. So it might be, your clock might say, 7:52, and the passing is 7:50. So it messes everything up. So we have to replace all the transmitters.
There's like a crystal in there that's supposed to maintain it, and it drifts over time.
Correct.
and you can see the buildings listed there. That would be all the buildings with the exception of Eagle and River, who don't need those. Now, Saxton Middle School, we talked about this at the last budget workshop when I was going over Mr. Krako's budget. And we were talking about that plan that we had put in place 2 years ago to convert the basement to the new wrestling room. By moving the wrestling room downstairs, this is part of that multi-year planning that we talked about now to revamp that space for the purposes of dance, extra clubs, Raider Academy that happens to be in that building, to refurbish that room. That's what we're looking to do with doing the floor and wall repair. That would be about $40,000 is the estimate. And then at the high school, and this is the one I mentioned with the civics group, when we saw their presentation, we looked at this right away and said, what can we do now in the current year? What can we do next year? And what we can do years out? And I shared that with the students, that this would be their part of like a 5-year plan for them to figure out how we can do these things. So Mr. Noonan and his staff already like removed the mural, replaced the signage. Mr. Richroth is looking to, within the confines of this year's budget, through some savings he has, look to get the lockable cabinets that they mentioned, so when they're charging their laptops, and not only put them at the high school, several at the high school, but also to introduce it on a smaller scale at each middle school. That's our goal, to do that within the confines of this year's budget. So with no extra impact, but just through savings to do that. But this is what we kind of showed them, what we can do in-house ourselves. Paul is looking into the electrical, adding more electrical outlets for that purpose as well. We would do that next year by our staff. But this is the bigger one, to get that carpet, because we know the aesthetics is such a prominent part of their plan. So we're looking to incorporate that into the infant transfer.
Can this be shared with them? So they know that we're.
Yes, well, once the board adopts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And with anything, you see the disclaimer at the bottom, this is the estimates that we've received, but we look to obviously seek efficiencies through this as well. If the bidding comes in less than this, where they're going to look for other capital improvements, primarily through the BCS, which is that building condition survey. But that's our hope always, but these are the ones that would be first and foremost to be done.
The other items that they had on their list, were they looked at and considered?
Well, not for next year.
Right.
Like I said,
I don't know that they felt it all had to be done like next year, but they were just looking.
Oh, yeah, we'll be looking at those. I think this is a continuing conversation. Furniture, I think, was on there. I'm trying to think of some of the molding.
Outlets.
Yeah, the outlets, yeah, we talked about that. But I just want,
We get back to them and let them know,
sure,
because they're all seniors,
yes, I mentioned that to them. I talked about the importance of coming back to see if
Yes.
your work is being carried on, or just to see the things that we've done,
Yeah.
so they don't think it was just empty
Yeah.
promises,
I think.
right?
Feel like they say things.
Yeah. And I just wanted to double back just quickly to the abatement part too, because I don't believe I mentioned this, but the importance of trying to do this. We've been doing abatement where needed as we do projects. Usually it's something that we determine we need to retrofit a room or change a space around, and we have to do it. And we do. And we've got monies in our budgets to do that. But when you do it on a piecemeal basis, a classroom at a time, or a single space, or two at a time, you're not receiving the benefit of those economies of scale. And this is something Mr. Noonan and I have been talking about for years. When I first got here, he was talking about, like, boy, if we knock out a whole wing at one time, or a whole school at one time, we're gonna save money by doing the abatement and the air monitoring all at one time. So we kind of had an eye on it. When we first went through the BCS, the first thing I brought to the board's attention was the unit ventilators, right? The second most prominent item that is throughout the report is the abatements.
And I would remind the trustee, excuse me, Frank,
Sure.
that years ago, we did something similar when we purchased for the roofs. If you recall, we did the roof repairs, we went out to bid, and we saved on bidding it all out at one time and planning the scope over which would happen over which summers. And we got the benefit of the savings from projecting out and getting a bid on the entire district replacement of roofs. So that similar concept should conceptually give us major savings because we're buying in bulk.
Do we see from the abatement standpoint, from a cost standpoint, because that was great, Dr. Jones, at that time, right, with the cost of materials. If we were to do the same thing now, the cost would be probably a lot more, even though we would still save by doing the same scope. Is the abatements been going up?
You mean in terms of the service, like for the,
A lot.
Yeah, they have to go.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, when they're done on an individual basis, they have to come back in over and over and over again. So the cost of their time to set up again when if the folks are already here, and you can consolidate it to come one time and do X amount of work as opposed to keep scheduling and coming back and forth, there are savings embedded in that design.
And the last point on that is the buildings you see there are just the ones that are the highest priority according to the BCS. But we do have needs at every single building. So like I mentioned, it was about $6 million. We'll be looking to do this over the course of the next several years. But we think this would be a nice head start to attacking this.
And this is typically done over summer or over breaks?
Yeah, breaks, yep.
It's always, once there is a plan and there are regular meetings on a regular basis, business official, construction manager, architects, whoever's involved. So if it's a music project, if it is a project involving athletics, they attend the meetings as well. And so all of those communication strategies are discussed. And then also, are you going to save money if you do it at night versus on a weekend? And how do you manage and interface with what is the business that has to be conducted? If we have summer school going on, how do we work around summer school and strategize the project such that there's no impact? So we do that every single summer in some way, shape, or form when we have to get work done. And so we're kind of accustomed, and hopefully now you'll be accustomed, Mr. Mazie and crew, to continue that work. But we've been doing this for many years.
Any further questions before I move on? Okay. So now we turn our attention to the budgets for community schools. And you may recall 3 years ago, we broke out small budgets, small pieces of that specifically for SEL, social emotional learning, for Ms. Candela, and then for the Family Center, just to have these few codes for budgeting purposes. And it gives us a good historical view in terms of now having data to look backwards at. On the contractual line, though, you'll see that's the driver for that $3,600 decrease, which is almost 5%. We no longer need the screener or the curriculum for the pre-K students in that area. On the Family Center, contractual supplies and materials, both of those reductions, like I said, they may not be big in terms of dollars either. It's just that we're looking now, we're getting a better feel for what we think we need to expend on an annual basis.
Wait, I just have a question.
Sure.
What's the curriculum that we're getting rid of for pre-K students? Like, what does that mean? It says screener or curriculum, so that's why I'm asking. Yeah, it says, I understand the screening, but what's the curriculum that we're getting rid of for pre-K students?
It came with the screener, so just
Oh,
like just like for the K to 5 or K to 8, we have the SEL curriculum that is part of the company screener, is aligned with the screener. Since we did away with the preschool portion of the screener, we don't have that particular same curriculum that they use at the preschool level.
Oh,
We have also written our own curriculum based on what we find to be more appropriate for the preschool students. We're going with Karen Moser, of course, Carolyn. So we use their resources when we initially had them, but we thought it's more advantageous to tailor it to our needs rather than the program that we had purchased.
Right, so we're not missing it.
No.
We just transfer it over to our own knowledge.
Exactly.
Any other questions before we move on? And then on the community school budget line that contains the salaries and the main costs that are associated with this, we have our biggest increases due to change in the staff members that are assigned to work in the Family Center that are captured here in this code. And that really consists of our social workers, our psychologists, and Ms. Candela in that code. Anyone else? And middle school deans. And that code you'll see is up about 147,000. No, I'm sorry, I was doing the total. The total. Is that 147? Thought that, if I think of 3 as a 4, that's bad. Now moving on to, I'm sorry, was that a question?
I didn't hear what you said, and what?
Oh, no, I thought that,
No, well, you said social workers, psychologists, Ms. Candela, and.
Deans.
oh, the deans.
Oh, okay.
Middle school deans.
Thank you.
Now, the district-wide codes and superintendent initiatives, you'll notice that I highlighted the yellow at the bottom there is because largely, the first one, the bottom one is entirely flat, and the one above it really is a nominal increase of 0.57. But this is where you're going to see the projects that we're doing, like radio connection newsletters, graduation expenses, things that we'll do for volunteer recognition night are going to be captured in these codes, but with no real effect now, you'll see on next year's budget. And this is the summary slide that I was alluding to. So we add all these budget areas for the evening. It's just under $800,000 in terms of an increase. And then what I love about it is when I talk about being, financially responsible, you look at everything we've talked about here is 1.02% in terms of its increase. So when we really talk about keeping things close to the vest and really approaching this the right way, this is yet another piece of evidence in that regard. So now let's talk about our revenue budget projections. And we know the situation that we've talked about with state aid, you've heard us say it, but some of the more, there's a lot of data on these slides. I know that maybe see this as a lot to process here. So call out some of the bigger highlights, but I don't have a pointer, but that top line, it shows you property taxes. If you see the column that says increase, decrease between 24, 25, the adopted budget and the proposed budget, that's at 3.274 million. That's the number that I shared with you at the last budget workshop when we did the property tax cap calculation. That's at 2.49%. That's what the formula spits out as our maximum levy. And that's what you'll see there as the source of revenue from the taxpayers. Moving down.
So to clarify,
Yes,
I
sure.
apologize, I wasn't able to make the last meeting. This number means that the taxes we were receiving from the community is reduced by whatever that very small number is.
Well, this is increased.
3 million, something.
Yeah.
So
It's
just
increased.
to be clear, maybe say
Yes.
it a different way, that when you plug in all the factors associated with the tax, to generate what the tax cap number is, we will be able to generate without exceeding the tax cap up to 2.49% levy to levy. Okay, that's different than state aid. So the amount that, did I get that right? I'm not rusty, right?
Oh, you're spot on.
Right, so 2.49% is levy to levy. Okay, so that's an increase of $3,274,963 over last year's.
Right.
Now, it's important to note that if for some reason the budget doesn't pass, we're going to be flat under a contingent budget, and we will not be able to add that 2.49% increase. Okay?
Yeah, if that was at the number you're looking at in that far right column,
No, I
perhaps.
think I'm just having trouble reading it. Why is it in red, which to me.
Yeah, that's what Dr. Jones was just talking.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
we're gonna,
That's the change between your proposed budget, 25, 26, to the
The
contingent budget.
contingent,
Yes, and then that's why you see the red.
see the contingent.
That's okay. We're gonna talk more about contingent. That's okay. That's why I said you're gonna see redundancies. You'll see it on this slide and you'll see it again later. And I'll go over it with you. I've highlighted for you to kind of explain. But you're welcome. So, what you see, on the state sources line, you'll see a 0 for that increase. And that's that state, there's our state aid. And you say, well, wait a minute, we talked about potentially a $200,000 increase. Why is it 0? And you may recall, if we go back to last year, when we adopted the budget, it was before the state aid was finalized, and they came in with less money. So when our budget was actually with a higher number, that's why you don't see the increase here on the revenue side of the budgeting. We still are getting those monies from the state, but in terms of budgeting, that's why you see a 0 there. The next one I want to point out is the interfund transfers.
So I just want to put this in perspective. We've talked about the rising cost of doing business. We talk about salary increases, benefits, et cetera. And we have essentially flat state aid, no increase. So had we not had the 2.549% from the tax cap calculation, we would have a real significant problem here in the district. So the fact that we were able to work together as a cabinet and as a leadership team of all the administrators, whether operational or professional or certificated, to come up with a budget that does not require accessing of any staff should the budget pass, it wasn't easy to do that. So, and to still sustain programs and move forward with everything that we have worked on for so long. But this is what this budget reflects. Okay?
And so, and the last, big thing that I wanted to share with you on this is there's a line that says appropriated fund balance. So you'll see last year, we had approximately $3.1 million in our appropriated fund balance. And our efforts, we had told you at the time, was to keep reducing that number. We're looking to reduce that by nearly $350,000 in this particular budget, to lower that to 2.8. That's going to be a theme you're going to hear. Did she do it? Did she point? Oh, good. But we are going to look to continue, so you're going to hear us talk about that over the next several years, because ideally we want to keep reducing our reliance on that, bring that down to zero. So we can achieve that, that's where we're going to.
And I want to say, there was a time when we were at zero, right? And then we dealt with the pandemic, and we had to get one-to-one devices for every single student in the district. And we were challenged with how in the world are we going to have this unplanned expense, not just that unplanned expense, but so many others, and how are we going to manage this? So that caused us to have to make that decision, and we've been meeting for months to see how can we begin to chip away, like we did all those years ago, to scale it back to be completely balanced in a district this size. And when we go over the fund balance projections, we are solid with fund balance. We're not taking from reserves significantly without replenishing them, which means we're pretty solid in that regard. So generally speaking, this is the best of a plan given the circumstances that we're facing, sit on the local level, the state level, and the national level.
And you'll see, like I said, you'll see a lot of this summarized on subsequent slides for you, but just like point them out here because it's good for you to see. But so you see in the proposed budget column that the proposed budget we're looking at is $245,272,116. Vanna will show you to my right. That represents a 1.63% when you compare budget to budget, which is really an impressive number. I think that the community is really going to be grateful for when you look at this in this kind of market without accessing staff, the way we've been able to do this. So the numbers are really going to speak volumes for us when we talk about how fiscally prudent we are. Trustee Smith, you'll see she's going to point to the zero at the bottom there under contingent budget. So a 0% increase or $0 increase. That means we took the entire levy out. That's why you see that 0%. So that's why you'll see me refer to it as a zero levy increase for contingent. And we'll talk more about that later. Thank you, Nicole. So now we have two slides actually on grants. There's not a lot here to do. It looks like our projected allocations are pretty much in line with what we had last year. The one on the school, Title I school improvement grants, because that is so discretionary, we're not sure exactly at this time if we're going to have that or not. So we're just showing right now that we think the change will be a loss of 125. But if you scroll down to the universal pre-K, we see a $300,000 and change increase. That was one of the more significant things that the governor did include in her executive proposal in terms of an increase for us.
Mr. Macy, I did get word this week that our school improvement grant, it will be the same. So
There we go, so we are now
So
at 425.
I would say, trustees, this page with grant analysis is critical to keep in the back of your mind, because this is one that we're gonna continually have to monitor to see, are any of these funds not going to be renewed? And it's gonna be critically important for next year to be monitoring this and providing updates and perhaps revisiting cutoffs and revisiting what gets purchased should we have to make adjustments in order to avoid mid-year layoffs of any sort, given this significant amount of money. You're talking, what, $6 million?
Yeah.
That could, some of it, none of it, all of it, we don't know.
And that was the one meeting where Trustee Smith was emailing me right before the meeting. They were talking about the federal freeze and everything, and we were looking at it as well, and there was a lot of chatter. We don't know what's going to happen with this particular government, and we're going to continue to watch it very carefully, as Dr. Jones said, because we need to, because we rely very heavily on it.
There is one other thing that we all have to be mindful, that as you move forward in this time of uncertainty, there could likely be lawsuits that are all over the place. Some may or may not affect this district, but then budgeting for legal services could be something that just, in the back of your mind, you're gonna be mindful of.
And this is the page 2 I mentioned about the grant analysis. And this is just there because we've shared this information with you over the past few years. But when we talked about the fiscal cliff and how important it was for us to plan, just take a look at that first column, how it's nearly $24 million that we were receiving in COVID-related grant funding, and how it was wonderful to get those monies. But look, just a few years later, how we are at zero. And when I say that we are well planning in this, that's evidence of it. And if we have to do is pick up Newsday in a few weeks, and you'll see all the districts that didn't plan the way we did. I told you, Dr. Jones said, how are we going to spend this money when we got it? And the next day, she's like, how are we going to figure out how to bring it into our budget to keep those supports in place? Because to not have it 3-4 years later, that's why you see people, yanking the rug out from under their staff. And but luckily, like I said, we've been very prudent in our approach to this, and we don't have any reliance on that.
And so over the last couple of years, anything that required us to hire staffing that we did want to consider long-term, such as all these AIS teachers that we hired during COVID, we had an action plan to build them into the general fund over time. So now they're in the general fund and it is sustainable. So it is a very important slide to show, going from 24 million in federal funds at the peak of those times to that all being depleted, and now we're facing possible changes at the federal level. So all of that is factored into the budgeting process.
So now we always share with you if there have been any changes to the account codes that you previously reviewed with you. And it was at budget workshop number 1 that we had in the childcare area, we had expenses related to the summer recreation program that we are running at Canaan. And we had them in there at the time because at that particular time, we were still predicting to have that. Since then, as you know, as a board, we've had the agreement now that we put in force with Future Stars for the summer camp. For those of you that don't know, in the community, the program will be a combination of sports camps and educational STEAM camps that they're going to be utilizing our facilities at Oregon for that purpose. So accordingly, we've removed those costs that we no longer will have related to our own program. And this program is going to be run by them with reductions in the costs for residents. And from what I hear, there's already a lot of good chatter on this. But here's my PSA, they are open houses for Future Stars on March 29th, April 26th, May 17th, and June 14th. I'm sorry?
Say those dates again.
Sure, of course. 3/29,
Yeah.
4/26, 5/17, and 6/14.
And Teresa has those dates, so if any trustees are interested in just receiving those dates, so if you want to attend one of those open houses just to receive information, Teresa's aware of those dates and can share it with
Are
you.
they here, like they're?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the program will be at Oregon, and so will the open house.
Oh,
Okay, and and those dates, it's 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day on those 4 dates. Not the program, the open houses will be 10 to 2.
in the morning? Who's the open house for?
Community members, anybody who wants to
The
attend.
parents
I believe those are Saturdays. Aren't they all Saturdays? I'm pretty sure they're,
Like, wait a minute, okay.
for people just to get more information about the program before they register. And residents, you'll know, like, the classes that they offer are gonna be highly dependent upon what people are registering for. They have a lot of nice choices. Okay, so, here's a slide that we're talking with the summary of the proposed budget. Once again, just a lot of data on here, but you see at that, the bottom line, the total proposed budget, as I mentioned, was that $245 million number. The change being 3.9 million in terms of the dollars, or 1.63% in terms of the budget to budget comparison. To the right there, you see that red number. That's that $3.2 million number. That's that tax levy. If we get forced to contingent, and just a quick word on contingent, I was gonna get to it, but we can talk about it now for those of you that want a refresher. If the budget does fail, the board has 3 options. The board can put up the same budget, the board can put up a revised budget, or the board can decide we can go to what's called a contingent budget. And I'll go through what that means with contingent budget, what things have to be removed, but it's predicated on the removal of the tax levy. It's a 0 tax levy increase, and then we work backwards from there to determine what would be removed. We have to stay within the constraints of the components of a budget, which is administrative portions, capital, and program, which is instructional. Because you can't just take from one area without taking from another. So it has to remain the same ratio that your budget is in. Any questions before I move on? Good, okay. Okay, whoops, of course, those things. Okay, here are the bullets I was talking about, so just to make it easier to read later. But this just reiterates some of the highlights of this $245 million budget, a 1.63 budget appropriation increase. It does include the interfund transfer of $2 million to capital projects. It is important to always point out and share with you that this budget does not pierce the tax cap. We pride ourselves on that. We've stayed within this tax cap again. The tax levy increase, as mentioned earlier, is 2.49%. And just I always like to include this on this slide, that tax cap formula tax caps the levy, not the rate. We're going to talk about the rate because a lot of times the community is always asking about that. So we've taken a lot of steps to make sure that it's clear to them. And that rate's going to vary from one community to the next, as will the cap. So here's the tax rate analysis. When we take that number, that 3.274 number, that levy to levy increase, we're going to take that number, we're going to divide that by the assessed valuation. That's determined by the town. The town gives us that number in August each year. And as I always state, we are going to put this before the community for a vote in May. So we have to kind of give our best guess estimate. We hedge on the side of caution to say, we think the rate couldn't be, and we give a range. We base that range on a 0 decrease in assessed valuation, upwards of a 1% decrease. Because as assessed valuation goes down, the tax rate will go up. So we want to paint, if you will, a pessimistic picture, because we want people to assume a worst case scenario. We've been very fortunate over the last 12 years that number has been better than the range we provided, if not within the range. And that range would be, if there's no change in that assessed valuation, 2.68% increase in the tax rate. If it goes upwards of a 1%, there would be a 3.71 increase in the tax rate. And just the other bullets there, just to kind of remind
Goes
you.
down.
Was that?
If the assessed valuation goes down,
Assessed, did I say the opposite? Assessed valuation goes down, the tax rate goes up. Okay, sorry about that. We changed this. We used to do a 0 to 2% range, and we felt like we were overstating it. We looked back over the last dozen years, and we've only exceeded that 1% number one time over that. So I think it's better to paint a more realistic picture for them. And like I said, we've been very accurate with our projections, so it's good. To give you an idea, the town assumes an average home in our communities of Patchogue-Medford to be assessed at $2,800, okay? If there's no decline in assessed valuation, their taxes would be an increase of $226.69 to support this budget.
on the average home assessed at $2,800. So if your home is assessed at more than $2,800, the value of the increase might be slightly higher. Correspondingly, if it's less, it'll be slightly lower.
So Frank, in the past, you've given that calculator.
Yes.
Do the same thing.
Yep, absolutely, sure.
So
And we'll review that,
go in,
yes.
Put in their address, they get back their assessed value, do the calculation.
We prepared that spreadsheet
Yep.
and we ran it, I think, every $500 in assessed value, is that right? I think it was, I thought it was every $500 in assessed valuation, so we'll go up, so people can say, all right, here's my assessed valuation on my house, scroll across and get a number, so they could really understand, hey, if I want to support this budget, what was it going to mean to me in terms of dollars? And I think many people that have come up to me when I do the budget roadshows, especially for the PTAs, they've told me they found it very helpful and easy. The town did change, we checked it earlier this year, the town did change their links a little. So I don't know if they're trying to, but we'll do our part, and we prepare the numbers. Because we want to just give people a rough idea, because we don't know if assessed valuation is going to change. But this is one good indicator. And just as another quick note, for what it's worth, this year, instead of doing a presentation at every single PTA meeting, I contacted the PTA council, which is revamped this year. We're going to do one big meeting for all of them. And I don't know the date offhand. It's in April. I can let the board know that. I'm going to do one meeting where it's going to be at Saxton. So save me a little wear and tear. Okay. Some notable highlights of the budget. So as you've heard me say throughout this, to prepare a fiscally responsible budget in which instructional services to students were not adversely impacted. And as you heard Dr. Cohen say, Dr. Jones and Dr. Cohen say, no excessing of staff. That was never even in our game plan, but you're going to hear a lot of that by surrounding districts as we go through this budget season. Important also to point out that we're going to continue the Raider Academy at Saxton Middle School. It's going to better service our students in an alternate setting, helps us avoid out-of-district placement. And the theme with this bullet and the next two is it's not just about money. It's primarily about what are we doing for our students to best support them. Because we realize the value of keeping them with their peers, keeping them with their fellow community members. So whether it's Raider Academy or our CT program, where we're bringing students back from BOCES, while that's a cost savings to us, it's advantageous for them to not spend their time midday to and from on a bus going from high school, to stay in the school with their classmates, graduating with them. Like this, these are important things that we've seen. Those relationships are key in the developmental years of students.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about the Raider Academy? Are we looking to add additional students?
Yes. So I know Dr. Hodgeberg is going to be presenting on Monday evening at our board meeting. We are looking, right now, we're servicing mostly 11th, some 10th. We're actually looking to bring in some 9th graders that we think, working with our special education department, maybe at Jefferson Academic Center, and bringing them back to district, right to our Raider Academy before they go to Sequoia. So those are some students that we're looking to bring back. And we already have some students now that we know are struggling at our high school, and we're having conversations with staff, even at our CSE meetings, or just if they're not a If they don't have an IEP, students with attendance issues that are just really having some difficulty in working with those parents now for next year.
So is it still self-sustaining?
Yes. Probably more now than
Yeah.
ever.
Absolutely. We have,
Yeah.
sorry.
No.
We have quite a few students right now that are hospitalized through Sagamore Services, Sagamore Children's Center. So we anticipate bringing those students potentially back to Raider Academy rather than going to Sequoia with Sagamore Services. We believe, and our program's a little bit actually more supportive because it's a smaller class size, there's less transitioning, less students from other districts to interact with. So we've had good success for students transitioning out of Sequoia or out of math or partial.
Okay. Does that affect the amount of space that we need, or are we still good on space?
No,
We
it's
don't-
still good on space, yeah, definitely good on space. And I think now that the program has, I think people are becoming aware of the program. They're visiting the program, and even physicians are becoming aware of the program because when we tell them about the program, right away, they're not recommending home instruction. No doctor really wants a child staying home isolated. So we're getting less doctors really requesting home instruction. They'll say to a parent, this is a perfect program for your child. So, that's really helpful for us. So, and the kids are enjoying it, and that's really the most important thing.
Thank you. You'll hear more about that in the presentation on Monday.
And so the last point on this page, along those same lines, was the expansion of our EASE program, the Emotional and Academic Supportive Environment at the elementary level. This is for our students with significant behavioral situations or intensive management needs. Now, here's the information we were talking about earlier about the contingent budget. So I'll go through this a little bit quicker because we did talk about a lot of this. It does require the cut of that levy amount, which is at 3.2 million. This will mean the total budget would be 241,997,153. One of the things that's required under contingent budget law, if you will, is you have to remove all equipment purchases. So those have been removed. You're also required to remove the interfund transfer to capital, so that would be removed. And then what we're left with is making the decisions, as I mentioned earlier, to stay within that tri-component ratios. It would require us to eliminate 2 administrative positions and clerical staff. Looks like 2 full-time and then 3 part-timers, and their associated benefits. And then finally, it would require a reduction of some supplies and also travel and conference expenses.
And I would just reiterate that in the last 15 years, we have not been on a contingent budget. We have passed all the budgets. As far as I recall, one time it didn't pass on the first go-round, and that was in the days of the transportation propositions. And it may have been one time that I can recall that it passed on the second time. Other than that,
Together.
yes.
Yes, correct.
Budget actually.
It requires,
Right.
correct.
The 60% majority.
Yeah, that was the only time. So that, we're hopeful that that is not the case, but we have to present you with what happens should we have to cut 3.2 million from our budget and stay in alignment. As you recall, there's an administrative component of program and a capital component. There are percentages that we must stay within those confines, which is why there are specific cuts that have to be cut from the administrative component of the budget to keep that appropriate, ratio is the word. Thank you.
I have a question. You had said in another section earlier that the way you had arranged it was to minimize the potential that if there were federal dollars that didn't go, if the monies did not come in the way that we had, then you were arranging things to try to eliminate the potential for mid-year layoffs. If we end up with a contingency budget, what does that do to the numbers that you've worked on to try to eliminate or minimize the potential for mid-year layoffs if the finances don't come in from Fed and state?
So the contingency budget, right, that's gonna be a reduced budget as we just talked about.
Right.
if something happens mid-year, we still have our federal funding support. If that is adversely affected, we're going to have to find means within the confines of the general fund budget regardless.
So what you
Contingent or
typically
approved
begin
budget.
to look at, right? You look at the lines in the budget where there are equipment or where there are supplies.
Right.
You may, normally we cut off purchasing in February. That may have to be revisited and cut off in November.
Right.
Everybody has to work toward trying to save positions, so there would be discussions with staff, discussion with administrators, discussions with the board. I won't be here, but just saying that hypothetically, it would have to be that kind of thing, and then work together to devise a plan that would mitigate any potential. You don't want to go through mid-year cuts, so you want to try to figure out how can we scale back in a $241 million budget, which it would be on contingency, in order to mitigate $6 million worth. What would that look like? Where could it come from? And there are all kinds of scenarios that can play out. If somebody leaves, perhaps seeing, can we do without that position in order to save a little? And you start to look at everything and try to determine where can you scale back. But there are many, the business office is extremely skilled in knowing how to manage that. And so it would require some more skill, but.
Just say no.
Yeah.
My question, I guess I didn't phrase it correctly, is I have no doubt that you guys are gonna do everything you can, if the funding does not come in, to not do those kind of layoffs. If we are on a contingency budget, does that make that much more difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We're still gonna have, we're still gonna have to make cuts.
Yes, of course.
Regardless, it would just be
Yes,
additional on top of the ones that we were forced to make by contingent.
Right. And then.
Correct.
Right,
Correct. So it'll be additional.
thank you.
Okay, so now, and this is a great segue, so our financial plan projections, you're gonna see this elaborate spreadsheet on the next page, but we use this as a tool to help guide our discussions. And it's hard because we're trying to predict what's gonna happen years down the road. We don't even know what's happening this year with the government. But that's what we try to look at, where we have idea on certain things that might be going up or down. We're gonna try to incorporate that into our thinking as we try to forecast what our needs can be. And that's why I said when I said you'll hear redundancies throughout the night, whether it be on the financial side or, for instance, on the capital improvement side. Mr. Noonan and Ms. Seminole and I, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the here and now, and we're looking down the road. We don't know what we're gonna do. Trustee Andrade mentioned, what about the library, the other things on the library plan for the civics class? That's that kind of thinking. This is the same type of thing. This is just a little bit more, financially laden in terms of what increases can we expect. It could be in healthcare, it could be in contracts that we have, it could be other things. For instance, it might be the steel increases that they're talking about, these big tariffs. It could be those kinds of things. So we try to use that as a tool to help us in our forecasting, and then we tie it into our fund balance projections and things of that nature. I'm sure you can't see the numbers, but you'll see basically, if you look at the main categories.
See numbers.
On the we break it out in terms of what we think projections could be on the revenue side, federally, and on the state level. The infant transfers, as I mentioned there, the expenditures in terms of major categories, and then we try to look at, like I said, our reserves toward the bottom. So I think if the board has specific questions on this way, if you take a chance.
They can't
with
see it.
No, I mean, I don't mean now, trust me. I can't see the numbers.
White hair. The eyeballs go with the white hair.
I would recommend that this not be scaled back for next year. They need larger.
Large projections.
I would just recommend
Do one line per slide.
I gotta see it with my glasses.
See.
I don't know.
So the bump, there is a bump there, right, in the projection?
Yeah.
That's all we were talking about before,
I'm not sure.
from the bond.
On debt service? Right?
Yes.
Yeah, you can see it's going from 11.7 to 12.1 to 12, I can see the next one, 12. 258, you'll see it to 13. Remember we talked at the bond last year, we talked about that bump in debt service? Our best guess is we think it might be a 2-year hitch, a little bit, and then a more significant one, and then the fall off, because if we time it with the other debt falling off, then you'll see that reduction.
But I see it, the number that nobody else can see.
Very good, well done, well done. I
That
will,
also includes, not just the bonds, it also includes the interest on the TAN notes. and
Right.
stuff like that. So it includes all debt service that in the district.
That you're expecting what? Just the fact that we said.
Just that there could be fluctuations in the TAN, and just so you see. the-
yes, 20, I believe you're right.
27, 28, yeah.
Yeah. But you'll see the big going down, and actually in 28 it goes to 10.5, so your
Yep.
highest is estimated at 13.4,
Right.
and then it goes to 12.9, and then you start seeing it trail off.
And then you know that as you start looking at borrowing, the way that the funds are managed, you know, our Moody's rating, we know, has been improved in the past, and that's gonna be critically important to capitalize the best interest rates on our borrowing, in addition to managing expenses and also with the TAM borrowings as well, because they look at all of that when they determine what the interest rates are gonna come in on those borrowings.
And, you know, and you're gonna hear more in the subsequent, next few months, but the bond projects are moving along nicely. Maybe even, I dare say, a little ahead of schedule, but as Dr. Jones is saying, or knock on wood, knock on wood, so sorry. You know, we talked about how we were gonna borrow, we were guessing maybe 3 stages for the borrowing. We're gonna see, because it depends on these approvals and what we have, but, we're moving on the front of the athletic projects, the theatrical upgrades, and on a portion of the HVAC projects. But depending on when we'll need to borrow, if we hold off now till like say July 1 of this year, we don't have to pay the interest in year one on principal. So it might be slightly ahead of those numbers that we shared last year, but we're gonna update the community and let them know so they understand what the impact can be and when. But it's gonna be good news because
The managing of the debt structure becomes critical in terms of staging when you have to start paying back, and you have to manage that to when the aid is coming in. And so that is an art to make sure that you sync those two so that when you're spending the money to pay the debt back, the aid is coming back on the revenue side at the same time.
almost there at the end. Okay. A quick slide on fund balance projection for the school year. We are projecting that the unreserved fund balance come in at 3.99%. The maximum it can be is 4.0, so this is wonderful. By being able to put away these monies, our plan to make a recommendation to the board would be to fund the ERS, which is the employee retirement system, which is not our non-teachers, but their retirement contribution fund. That would be in the amount of 1.75 million. The teachers, they call it the retirement contribution sub-fund, that's TRS, Teachers Retirement System. That would be in the amount of 1.5 million. And then proposed funding in the capital reserve in the amount of 2 million. So now, just not to confuse that with the in-the-fund transfer to capital we talked about earlier. This would be the capital reserve. You may recall we had the vote for to open up a reserve 2022.
The specific.
Yes, there's about $2 million or so left in there now. We would be adding this to that. And once again, by the beauty of doing this is to help us to attack capital infrastructure projects throughout the district without going out to borrow. just because we are doing this $83 million bond, we still have lots of needs, and we'd be negligent if we weren't looking to address them on multiple fronts with different funding sources by using the monies we saved.
So I wanted to just put this all in context, right? So we looked at the levy increase, levy to levy, 2.49%. Expense to expense budget,
6.3. Yep.
6.3. You're looking at coming in almost exactly at the 4%, which you can't exceed 4%, but still being able to fund other reserves by 2 million plus.
5.25, sorry.
Right. Good, thank you. I didn't have to add it in my head. So over $5 million of an increase to our various reserves while still not accessing, sustaining programs, and still moving forward with our capital projects.
And those reserves are coming in with state funding as part of that money that came in.
So
It
the,
ends up in the reserve.
yeah, so
But it
it,
didn't cost the community that full amount.
it did not cost the community. It's essentially, when revenue comes in, any excess revenue compared to any underspending of the expense side of the budget, the net of those comparisons of those two sides of the budget afford us the ability to take any plus the appropriation to fill the gap, and we're still at this juncture able to increase reserves, appropriate for what we need, not exceed the tax cap, not excess, and still fully fund our unreserved fund balance. And why is that important? Because that's your starting point for next year. And if that is fully funded, then you're at least in that position to start your budget next year at the same place you ended it this year. And then you see what happens in the world. I just wanted to contextualize.
Yeah, and again, to be clear on when you finish that bond, and there's excess money in the bond, right? The option is we could give that money back.
Yes, or you can,
But if you give that money back, you're giving it back with the money that you got from the state, as opposed to putting it into the reserves.
you can put it into the reserves, you can do a multitude of things, you continue, you can get permission from the community to continue spend on other capital projects in accordance with the building conditions survey, so that you're continuing the work that everybody's familiar with. And certainly the Plan and Facilities Committee would talk about that and continually know what's going on.
So the last thing is just some important dates that are coming up. By March 24th, which is the date of our next week's budget meeting, that would be anticipated. What did I say? I said budget, I'm sorry. Board business meeting. Too many Bs. That is the anticipated adoption of the budget, and if so, the property tax report card. We are required to transmit that property tax report card to NYSED no later than April 28th, so we do have some time. Should the board adopt next week, we would transmit it on the following day on March 25th.
And I always remind the trustees that the adoption date is critical, because then the newsletter has to be worked on. And we have a short turnaround, we have a break, a spring break in there, and there's deadlines to make sure that we get everything to the printer in time for the budget hearing. And so it is important so that that work can begin and that there's no holdup there, so. And then.
Post office.
And, yeah, that's a big,
Oh, God, that's.
Hoping it gets there.
that's a big question, and that is something that.
And it
this-
doesn't rain when they do
And
it.
it doesn't rain.
And they throw it out.
I don't wanna say.
Throw it out.
They threw them all out because they got wet.
Yeah, they do, they really do. Trustees, I know that there'll be some discussion about flexibility with the May 8th date. Frank has had, reported that there's a few things, so I think that's gonna be a discussion that Teresa's prepared to have with the board as to whether there's any flexibility in that date. If there's not, Frank,
I'll be here.
you'll be here? Okay.
And the April PTA council is in this timeframe
Oh,
too.
the one I'm talking, the
Yeah.
presentation, I'll get that date to you.
It's April, I believe, it's April 8th at 6:30 at Saxton. Only because Pam brought it up at our legislative committee. So
Oh.
that's why, it's in my minutes.
No, I know it's in, we're doing doing.
See how we all work together?
April 8th?
Tuesday, April 8th at 6:30. That's what Pam shared. I believe it probably is accurate.
Frank will update this slide and we can include it in the Friday update so that we have all the adjusted dates.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Cohen.
Any trustees have any questions? So if there are no questions, we're hopeful that we can just put a resolution on for Monday. If there are no questions, it can just go through. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.
Great job. For all the uncertainties that are out there, and moving parts, put together a budget that makes sense and be able to continue with all the programs and not lose any teachers or staff. I think it's a job well done. Thank you.
1.63%
budget.
Crazy. You know, I say it every time, but I think it's worth repeating. It's when you work with a very good team like this, you know, it's not just saying it's collaborative, you can hear it. You know, everyone is partaking, work very well together at all levels. Constant discussions that start in November, and you can see the byproduct when you're sitting here, you know, 5 months later, of how we look at all these different things.
I just think it's fantastic because every time you turn on the TV, there's another district that's looking to close a school or cut something or, you know.
The only thing I would say is, you know, it was almost as if Dr. Jones saw my presentation before she got here tonight, because she stole my thunder on like more than one occasion, which is all right to do. I know that. I'm just saying,
That's a lot of attention.
but very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much attention.
He needs his right and left hand.
Oh, absolutely. Also,
Okay, so at this time, we need a motion to enter into executive session.
Are we here? Are we staying here or are we moving?
We're staying here, yeah.
Cool.
Second? All in favor? All opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you.